Hey guys, tonight we're going to settle in and imagine ourselves in a truly unenviable position. Shipwrecked on a brutal sub-Antarctic island. Think about it. The unforgiving cold, the sheer isolation, the kind of wind that feels like it's trying to physically peel your skin off your bones. It's the kind of scenario that makes forgetting your phone charger feel like a minor inconvenience. You're soaking wet, hypothermia is knocking, and dinner isn't just takeout. Difficult, it's existentially challenging. Let's be honest, statistically speaking, you probably won't survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. While you're at it, feel free to drop your location and local time in the comments below. It's always interesting to see where you're all tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first thing you register isn't a sight or a sound, but a feeling. It's the bone-deep ache of cold, a pervasive, heavy chill that seems to have seeped into your very marrow. You're lying on something gritty, something hard, and something that feels like it's trying to absorb your body heat like a sponge. Sand. Coarse, wet sand, clinging to fabric that's plastered against your skin. Above you, the wind is a constant, mournful howl, punctuated by the distant crash of waves that seem angry you've arrived. There's the metallic tang of salt in the air, mixed with something damp and earthy that you can't quite place yet. Maybe rotting seaweed, maybe something else entirely. Opening your eyes is a struggle. They feel heavy, gritty, crusted with salt. The light is diffuse, gray, and unwelcoming. It's just past dawn, perhaps, or maybe it's midday under a sky permanently stained with cloud. Everything is muted, drained of color. The sky is battleship gray, the water a churning leaden mass, the sand a desaturated brown. Even your fingers, when you finally manage to twitch them, look pale and alien against the dark, wet fabric of your clothes. Every muscle screams in protest as you try to shift. Your head pounds, a dull throb behind your eyes. It feels like you've just completed a marathon you didn't sign up for, while simultaneously being dunked in an ice bath and left outside in a hurricane. Talk about a rough start to the day. You push yourself up gingerly, every joint protesting. Water squelches from your clothes, instantly chilling the air around you. The wind immediately finds you, whipping at your face and tearing at your clothes. It's a relentless force, a constant pressure that makes standing feel like leaning into a solid wall. This isn't just a breeze, it's an active, hostile presence. You look around, blinking away the salt water stinging your eyes. The scene is one of utter desolation. Before you stretches a beach littered with debris, splinters of wood, tangled ropes, splintered crates, and other unrecognizable fragments, all testament to the violence that brought you here. This wreckage is the scattered remains of your ship, the ship that was supposed to carry you safely, the ship that failed in the most spectacular and inconvenient way possible. Seeing it broken like this is a punch to the gut, a stark visual confirmation of your predicament. Behind you, the land rises abruptly, a jagged, unforgiving landscape shrouded in mist and low-lying cloud. It looks like something out of a particularly bleak fantasy novel. All craggy rocks, tussock grass, and maybe some incredibly unhappy-looking birds. There are no trees here, no welcoming green canopy, just this harsh, exposed terrain offering no obvious shelter or succor. It's just you, the wreckage, the endless ocean, and this desolate, wind-scoured rock. The silence, once the initial shock begins to recede, is profound, broken only by the elements. No distant traffic, no humming city sounds, just the raw, untamed voice of nature. It's the kind of silence that presses in on you, making you acutely aware of your own fragile breathing, the frantic beat of your heart. The cold is no longer just an ache, it's a danger. Your hands are numb, clumsy. Your feet feel like blocks of ice inside your waterlogged boots. You know, historically, hypothermia has been a far deadlier killer in many survival situations than starvation or injury, particularly in cold, wet environments like this. It saps your strength, dulls your mind, and can sneak up on you deceptively fast. You need to get out of these wet clothes somehow and find shelter, which seems like a Herculean task given the lack of obvious options. As you stumble forward a few steps, your eyes scan the beach instinctively, searching for anything useful. An intact box, a piece of canvas, a sign of other survivors. So far, nothing but brokenness. This part of the world, these sub-Antarctic islands, were historically known as the Roaring Forties and Furious Fifties due to the incredibly strong winds and treacherous seas, a reputation your recent experience confirms with brutal efficiency. It takes a moment for the full weight of your situation to really sink in. You are alone, or perhaps with a few others you haven't located yet, stranded on what feels like the very edge of the world. There's no cell service here, no convenient store just down the road, no rescue party you can signal with a flare gun you suddenly wish you had. You are utterly and completely on your own. It's like being dropped into the ultimate escape room, except the only prize is not dying and the clock is ticking down, measured in body heat and hope. The sheer scale of the problem feels overwhelming. Where do you even start? There's the immediate need for warmth and shelter, the pressing need for fresh water. Salt water is a cruel joke. And the looming, terrifying question of food. Looking at the barren landscape, the chances of finding something edible, something easily edible, seem vanishingly slim. Historians still argue whether early shipwreck survival accounts always fully capture the psychological trauma of that first realization, the moment you grasp the true isolation and scale of the challenge. Some argue the focus was often on the practical steps, downplaying the sheer, crushing despair that must have accompanied it. Your mind races, jumping from one impossible task to the next. Build a fire? With what fuel? And how do you even start one when everything is soaked? Find food? What kind and where? Signal for help? To whom? The questions pile up, each one seemingly more insurmountable than the last. It's enough to make you want to just lie back down in the sand and let the cold take you. But something deep inside, some primal instinct, rebels. Not yet. Not like this. You force yourself to take another shaky breath, to push back against the rising tide of panic and despair. This is the reality now. Cold, wet, alone, and staring down the barrel of one of the most challenging experiences a person can face. And it has just begun. The cold, remember? It's the primary antagonist right now, more pressing than hunger or even the crushing loneliness. It's an immediate physical threat. You push through it, though, driven by that flicker of instinct that says, move or die. Your eyes are fixed on the scattered remains of the ship, strewn along the high tide line and even further inland where the biggest pieces were probably tossed by the waves. This isn't just debris, it's a potential hardware store, a salvaged supermarket, well, you get the idea. It's your only immediate resource. Stumbling across the sand and rocks is slow going. Your boots are heavy, filled with water, and every step feels like lifting weights attached to your ankles. The wind is still tearing at you, making you hunch your shoulders and squint. Splinters of wood, some alarmingly large and jagged, lie everywhere, mixed with ropes thick with salt and barnacles, and twisted metal bits that look like abstract art nobody asked for. The air smells of wet wood, decay, and something vaguely oily, the remnants of the ship's workings, perhaps. It's not a pleasant smell, but it's better than the smell of despair, which you're actively trying to ignore. You start methodically, scanning the larger pieces first. A section of hull, upturned and broken, offers nothing but cold, wet wood. A mast snapped in two is equally useless in this immediate moment. What you need are smaller things, contained things, things that might have survived the impact relatively intact. Your eyes dart between piles of wreckage, searching for shapes that look less like random destruction and more like deliberate objects. A barrel? A crate? Anything that might have held supplies. You spot something half buried in the sand. A wooden box. Hope surges, a tiny, fragile thing in this vast emptiness. You scramble towards it, hands already numb and clumsy. It's heavy, waterlogged, and the wood is swollen. Trying to pry it open with just your frozen fingers is impossible. You scan around desperately for something to use as a lever. A sturdy piece of wood, maybe? A loose metal bar? Ah, there's a chunk of timber with a sharp edge. You wedge it into a crack in the box and lean your weight onto it. The wood groans, resists, then with a splintering crack, the lid gives slightly. Inside, nestled amongst damp straw or packing material, are bottles, glass bottles. Your heart sinks slightly. Not food, not warm clothes. But maybe they contain something useful? Wine, spirits, or something else entirely. You manage to pull one out. It's sealed, thankfully. The label is illegible, smeared and water damaged, but the liquid inside is dark. Could it be rum? A little bit of alcohol might offer temporary warmth, but it's a dangerous game in the cold. Still, it's something. You find a few more bottles in the box. Not exactly the treasure chest you dreamed of, but hey, at least you found something that wasn't actively trying to poke your eye out. Finding salvageable goods from a shipwreck was, historically, a vital part of survival for many castaways, providing not just supplies, but also materials for shelter and tools. Moving on, you continue your systematic search. It's tedious work, requiring you to poke through tangled messes of rope and canvas, lift heavy, waterlogged objects, and constantly scan the ground. You need anything that can help. Tools, canvas, or sailcloth for shelter, dry wood, unlikely, but you look anyway. Sealed provisions, maybe even medical supplies. The sheer volume of useless debris is disheartening. It's like trying to find a specific Lego brick in a swimming pool filled with rubble. You find a roll of sodden canvas, heavy and smelling strongly of salt and decay. It's not dry, but maybe it could still be used for shelter later, once you figure out where to build one. You add it to a small pile of potentially useful items you're starting to gather near a larger piece of wreckage that might offer a slight windbreak. You also find several lengths of sturdy rope, always useful if you can manage to untangle them from the mess. It's the small victories that keep you going. Finding rope feels surprisingly significant in this moment, like discovering a new technology. Further up the beach, closer to the high water mark, you see something glinting. You hurry towards it, slipping on wet rocks. It's a small metal box, severely dented, but potentially still sealed. With shaking hands, you try to open it. The lid is bent. You fumble for the piece of sharp timber you used earlier and wedge it in, twisting and prying. It finally pops open with a screech of tortured metal. Inside, nestled amongst damp paper, are what look like biscuits or hardtack. Miraculously, they seem relatively dry, sealed inside some kind of oilcloth wrapping within the metal box. Food. It's not a 5-course meal or even particularly appetizing looking, but it's calories, and it feels like hitting the jackpot. Historically, ship's biscuit was a staple, designed to last for long voyages, though often becoming infested with weevils over time. You don't see any immediate signs of unwelcome guests, which is a win. The search continues. You find a couple of relatively intact wooden planks, useful for building. A few more lengths of rope. Another small crate, but this one contains only broken pottery, cargo that didn't fare well. You also discover a sailor's ditty bag, a small canvas pouch. Inside, everything is damp and ruined, except for a sturdy knife with a bone handle. The blade is a bit rusty, but it's intact and sharp. A knife. This feels like a genuine tool, something that immediately expands your capabilities. It's amazing how quickly your priorities shift. Yesterday, a lost wallet would be a disaster. Today, a rusty knife feels like a gift from the gods. As you work, you keep an eye out for any sign of other survivors. Have others made it to shore? Are they further along the beach? You call out tentatively, but the wind whips your voice away, and only the elements answer. The silence is deafening. It's a quirky historical tidbit that sometimes survivors from the same wreck could be stranded on different parts of the same island for weeks or even months before finding each other, purely due to the rugged terrain or prevailing weather. You hope that isn't the case here. The sun, if you can call that weak gray light sun, is beginning to dip closer to the horizon. Or maybe it's just sinking behind a particularly thick bank of clouds. Either way, the light is fading and the cold is intensifying. You haven't found anything resembling proper shelter, just broken pieces. You've gathered a few supplies, some bottles, some hardtack, canvas, rope, planks, and a knife. It's a meager haul considering the scale of the disaster, but it's more than you had an hour ago. You realize the beach scavenging can only get you so far. The truly essential resources, fresh water, long-term food, secure shelter, aren't going to wash up conveniently at your feet. Historians still argue whether the initial focus of castaways should have been solely on finding immediate shelter, or if prioritizing scavenging for tools and supplies was the more effective long-term strategy. It's a classic chicken and egg problem when you're hypothermic and starving. You've split the difference, gathering what you can from the wreck, while knowing you need to find or build shelter before nightfall. The wind seems to be picking up again, a mournful song that promises a long, cold night. Time to look inland. The beach scavenging, while crucial for gathering initial supplies, is only a temporary measure. You can't sleep out here in this biting wind, exposed to whatever weather decides to roll in. As the light fades, the instinct to find shelter becomes overwhelming. You turn your back on the immediate chaos of the wreck and look towards the landmass behind the beach. It rises steeply, a rugged, forbidding landscape of tussock grass, scattered rocks, and what looks like treacherous bogs in the low-lying areas. It doesn't exactly scream cozy bed and breakfast. Moving inland isn't easy. The ground is uneven, often spongy underfoot from accumulated moisture. The tussock grass, while offering some visual obstruction from the wind lower down, is tough and tangled, snagging at your legs. Every step requires conscious effort. You're looking for anything that offers natural protection. A rock overhang, a small cave, unlikely on an island like this, but you hope. Or even just a depression in the ground that's shielded from the prevailing wind. The cold follows you, clinging to your damp clothes. You can feel it seeping into your bones. The key criteria for a first shelter are simple. It needs to block the wind, offer some protection from potential rain or snow, and ideally not be in a place prone to flooding or rockfalls. You scramble up a small rise, scanning the area. Below, the beach looks even more desolate in the deepening gloom. Above, the land stretches away, silent and indifferent. This is where the real challenge begins. Survival isn't just about finding food. It's about creating a microenvironment where your body can function without constantly battling the elements. Finding or building shelter was historically the most immediate priority for many castaways after securing water, often within the first 24-48 hours, because exposure was such a rapid killer. You spot a cluster of large boulders further inland, maybe offering some nooks and crannies. You head towards them, pushing through the resilient, sharp-edged tussock. It's slow going, like wading through chest-high, angry weeds. You reach the boulders, which are slick with damp and probably covered in various types of hardy lichen and moss. Peering in between them, you find a relatively sheltered spot, a sort of alcove where two large rocks meet, creating a slight overhang. It's not much, maybe big enough for you to curl up in, but it's definitely better than being completely exposed. The wind is noticeably less fierce here. It's not a 5-star hotel or even a 1-star hostel, but it's a start. You think back to the canvas you salvaged. Could that help? You drag the heavy, sodden canvas towards the rock shelter. It's awkward to handle, but you manage to drape it over the slight overhang, trying to create a more enclosed space. You use some of the salvaged rope to tie down corners to rocks where possible, or even just jam them under heavy stones. It's not perfect, gaps remain, and the canvas is dripping. But it offers a psychological as much as a physical barrier against the elements. It feels like you've put up a tiny, soggy wall between yourself and the vast, cold indifference of the island. If this were a reality show, this would be the point where they play dramatic music, but here, it's just the sound of the wind whistling around the rocks and the quiet slosh of water in your boots. This temporary shelter will have to do for tonight. You haven't found a cow, haven't built a sturdy hut. That requires tools and energy you don't have yet. But you've used what you found to create something. You clear away some of the damp ground cover from your chosen spot within the alcove. It's still cold and damp, but it's out of the direct wind. You sit down, leaning back against a cold, hard rock. Your muscles ache, your feet are numb, and the exhaustion is profound. The biscuit you found earlier is now a tempting thought, but maybe it's better to wait until you're settled. Thinking about shelter, it's a quirky tidbit that some shipwrecked sailors, especially in colder climates, would initially try to burrow into snowdrifts or construct rudimentary shelters from ice, if applicable, highlighting the sheer desperation to escape the immediate cold, even with materials that offer limited long-term protection. Thankfully, there's no snow, yet, just this persistent, damp cold. You pull the damp canvas tighter around the opening as best you can. It smells strongly of the sea. The lack of a proper fire is a glaring problem. You found no dry wood on the beach, and everything inland is likely saturated or green. Without fire, drying your clothes is impossible, and the cold will remain a constant threat, potentially leading to hypothermia. This damp shelter offers minimal protection against that. You need fire not just for warmth, but for boiling water, if you find any fresh water, and for cooking. Finding a way to make fire is now catapulted to the top of your mental list. Right after finding water and food, you huddle deeper into your makeshift shelter. The rock is cold against your back. You can hear the wind outside, but it's muted now. It's a small comfort. The darkness is settling in rapidly, the gray light fading into a deep, moonless black. Survival guides often emphasize the importance of shelter before dark, and you've just managed to scrape by. It feels less like an accomplishment and more like avoiding immediate failure. You remember the bottles from the beach. Maybe a small sip of whatever is inside could offer a brief illusion of warmth. Probably a terrible idea in terms of retaining body heat, but the thought is there. Historians still argue whether the psychological impact of establishing a secure, albeit temporary, shelter outweighed the physical benefits in the initial stages of survival, suggesting that simply having a perceived safe space could boost morale significantly enough to improve decision-making. Right now, the psychological comfort of being somewhat out of the wind is definitely a plus, even if you know the shelter is flimsy. You pull your knees up to your chest, trying to conserve warmth. The island outside is a vast, dark unknown. But for this moment, you are in something, not just on everything. It's a tiny wind. The first night settles in, heavy and absolute, inside your little rock and canvas nook. It's less a restful retreat and more a slightly less miserable waiting game. The cold is a physical presence, a persistent, unwelcome companion that wraps around you, finding every gap in your damp clothes. You can feel the chill seeping up from the cold, damp ground beneath you, even through the flimsy barrier of whatever random debris might be there. Curling into a ball helps a little, drawing your knees tight to your chest, but it's an exercise in minimizing heat loss, not generating warmth. It feels like your body is a leaky radiator on its lowest setting, desperately trying to hold on to the last vestiges of warmth while the vast, cold environment outside relentlessly tries to steal it. The wind still whistles and howls around the boulders, its sound amplified and distorted as it rushes past the canvas you've draped. It's a constant reminder of the world you're barely sheltered from. You can hear the distant, rhythmic crash of waves on the beach, a sound that was perhaps comforting in another context, but here, it just speaks of the immense, cold ocean that stranded you. There are other sounds too, the rustling of unseen things in the tussock grass outside, hopefully just birds or seals, nothing with too many teeth. The drip, drip, drip of moisture from the canvas or the rocks. Every sound feels amplified in the oppressive darkness. Sleep is a distant, cruel joke. Your body aches from the day's exertion, your muscles protesting every time you shift position. Your feet are still numb despite rubbing them vigorously earlier. You try closing your eyes, focusing on slowing your breathing, maybe imagining a warm, cozy fire. But the cold is too insistent, too real. Your mind races, replaying the events of the day, the chaos of the wreck, the desperate scramble on the beach, the search for shelter. You tally the meager supplies you managed to gather, a few biscuits, some rope, the heavy canvas, those mysterious bottles. It doesn't feel like much against the enormity of the task ahead. What are the immediate priorities? Shelter is this. Not great, but it's something for now. Water is critical. You haven't found a freshwater source yet, and relying on the salty sea is obviously a no-go. Thirst will become a problem quickly. Food is needed for energy, but you have those biscuits, at least for a short while. Fire is paramount, though. Without fire, purifying water is difficult, cooking is impossible, and staying warm is in losing battle. The thought of trying to make fire from damp materials with no tools is daunting, to say the least. You briefly consider if any of those bottles might contain something flammable, but quickly dismiss it. Best not to start your survival story by setting yourself on fire, trying to open a mystery bottle. You shift again, trying to find a less uncomfortable angle. The cold rock presses into your hip. This is the reality of primitive survival, a constant battle against discomfort and exposure. It's a far cry from those glossy survival shows where everyone seems to have a perfect lean-to built in an hour. This is messy, cold, and deeply unpleasant. You wonder if anyone knows where you are. Were there distress signals sent? Is anyone looking? The isolation is a heavy weight in the darkness. You are utterly alone, save for whatever wildlife inhabits this windswept rock. Historically, the hierarchy of survival needs for mariners shipwrecked in cold climates almost universally placed. Finding or creating shelter, and then finding a source of potable water ahead of securing food, emphasizing how quickly exposure and dehydration could incapacitate or kill, often within a day or two, depending on conditions. Food, while essential long-term, could often be survived without for longer periods than water or warmth. It's a grim calculation, but one that highlights the urgency of your current situation. You need water, and you need fire to make it safe to drink, unless you find a natural, pure source like a spring, highly unlikely on a small island like this, or collect rainwater. Not happening tonight. A quirky tidbit about sailors stranded in cold areas is that some accounts mention survivors trying to eat penguins or seals raw in the initial desperation before fire could be established. A risky practice due to parasites, but one driven by sheer hunger and lack of options. The thought makes your stomach turn, which is probably a good thing. You don't want to add food poisoning to your list of problems tonight. You stick with the idea of rationing the dry biscuits. The cold seems to bite harder as the hours crawl by. Time loses its meaning in the darkness, broken only by the rhythmic sounds of the sea and the wind. You try to assess the strength you have left. You're exhausted, hungry and cold, but you're alive. That's the baseline. Everything else is secondary. You need to survive the night, and then tomorrow the search for water and fire becomes the absolute priority. Maybe explore inland more thoroughly. Look for signs of habitation. That feels far-fetched. This island feels utterly deserted. Historians still argue whether the intense psychological stress and sleep deprivation experienced during the first few nights of survival significantly impaired decision-making abilities, leading to potentially fatal errors, or if the sheer adrenaline and necessity sharpened focus. Right now, your mind feels a bit foggy with exhaustion and cold, but the core needs are crystal clear. Water, fire, food, and a better shelter eventually. You make a mental note to check those bottles again in daylight. Maybe, just maybe, one of them isn't full of seawater or something terrible. A bottle of something strong could theoretically help with warmth, but the risks? Yeah, probably not worth it. Stick to priorities. You shiver violently. The cold is relentless. Every muscle in your body feels tense, fighting against it. This is what it means to be truly exposed, truly at the mercy of the elements. You're just a fragile bit of organic matter on a cold rock in a vast, indifferent ocean. It's a humbling, terrifying realization. The dream of rescue seems impossibly distant. For now, survival depends entirely on your own actions, your ability to find and use resources. And right now, your main resource is just stubborn refusal to give up. You tuck your chin deeper into your chest, trying to create a tiny pocket of slightly warmer air to breathe. The night is long, but it won't last forever. It can't. You tell yourself this over and over again in the dark. The first hint of dawn doesn't creep in gently. It's more like the darkness reluctantly gives up its absolute dominion. You don't see a sunrise, not really, just a gradual lightening of the oppressive blackness outside your meager shelter. The world transitions from featureless void to shades of gray, then muted browns and greens as the scant light filters through the canvas and around the boulders. You peel open heavy eyelids. Every muscle screams in a protest. You are stiff, achy, profoundly cold, and desperately thirsty. The night didn't offer rest, only endurance. Pulling yourself out of the curled position feels like dismantling a poorly packed suitcase. Each joint groans. Your clothes are still damp, clinging uncomfortably to your skin, amplifying the chill. The damp earth beneath you feels even colder now, as if the night leached away any residual warmth it might have held. You take a deep, shuddering breath, the cold air stinging your lungs. Okay, you survived the night. That's something. It's a low bar, but you cleared it. The first sharp, undeniable sensation is thirst. Your mouth feels like sandpaper, your throat dry and scratchy. You haven't had a drink of fresh water since yesterday morning. It feels like a week. The ocean is right there, a vast, mocking expanse of liquid, utterly useless for drinking. You instinctively reach for your pockets, for any water bottle you might have carried. But of course, there's nothing. Just empty, damp fabric. Water. Priority one, clear as the still cloudy morning sky. The second immediate thought is fire. Without fire, that thirst problem is magnified. Even if you find a potential water source, how do you make it safe? Boiling is the reliable method. And beyond water, there's the desperate need for warmth, for drying clothes, for morale. The cold has been your tormentor all night. Fire is the only thing that can truly push it back. The thought of trying to create fire with nothing but damp materials and numb fingers feels almost insurmountable. But you have to try. You push yourself up to a sitting position, leaning back against a cold boulder. Outside, the wind is still blowing, though perhaps a little less fiercely than in the dark hours. The tussock grass sways and whispers. The sea sighs on the beach. It's a desolate scene, beautiful in a harsh, unforgiving way. This isn't a tropical paradise with coconuts falling at your feet. This is rock, moss, coarse grass, and endless ocean under a pale gray sky. You need to move. Staying huddled will only prolong the misery. You carefully gather the few items you managed to salvage yesterday. The heavy canvas, good for shelter, maybe useful for catching rain if it ever decided to fall. The biscuits, a small, finite food source. Not for now, save them. The rope, always useful. Those mystery bottles, still a puzzle. You heft the canvas, fold it awkwardly, and tuck it into a less wet spot in the shelter nook for later. The bottles clink together. You pick one up, examining it in the weak light. Dark glass, no label. Smells faintly of something. Not good. You put it down. Probably best to leave the potential poison juice alone for now. Stepping out of the rock alcove feels like emerging into another dimension of cold. The air bites. Your legs are stiff, protesting the movement. You take a few tentative steps, looking around the immediate vicinity of your little camp. The beach stretches out, strewn with kelp and debris. Behind you, the island slopes upwards, covered in that thick, yellow-green tussock grass and scattered boulders. Where to look for water? Springs often emerge higher up, where ground saturation is greater. Gullies and depressions might channel rainwater, if only. Low-lying areas might have bogs, but that water is often stagnant and questionable without boiling. Uphill seems the most logical starting point. And fire? Where do you find dry fuel on an island that seems perpetually damp and wind-lashed? The tussock grass is thick, but probably holds a lot of moisture. Driftwood on the beach is an option, but it's also likely saturated. You'll need tinder, something that catches a spark easily. Dry bird nests? Not obvious. Fine, dry grass? Hard to find. You sigh. This isn't going to be easy. Historically, shipwreck survivors in cold climates understood the critical link between water, fire, and survival. Accounts from Antarctic expeditions or northern sea disasters consistently rank securing a heat source in fresh water as the immediate post-wreck priorities, often before even attempting to signal for help or forage for food. They knew that hypothermia and dehydration could kill far faster than starvation. It's a stark reminder of the hierarchy of needs when everything has gone spectacularly wrong. You take a few steps towards the slope behind the boulders. The tussock grass is taller than you expected in places, making walking difficult and hiding uneven ground. Your feet sink into the boggy patches. This island is fighting back already. You scan the ground as you walk, looking for anything useful. Dry plant matter, strangely shaped rocks that might be tools, signs of animal life, potential food, but also potential danger. You see a few small birds, nothing that looks easy to catch. A quirky tidbit from the age of sail. Some survivors, desperate for dry tinder, would reportedly take apart their ship's compass, using the fine paper or cotton wadding inside as kindling, sacrificing navigation for the immediate need of fire. It highlights the almost insane lengths people would go to for warmth and the ability to boil water in truly dire circumstances. You check your pockets again. No compass, not even a soggy tissue. You're starting from scratch. The climb is slow and tiring. Your legs burn, your lungs ache in the cold air. You keep scanning, looking for any sign of a stream, a pool, anything that isn't salty ocean. The wind whips around you as you gain altitude. You turn back for a moment, looking down at the beach and the chaotic debris field left by the wreck. It's a painful reminder of everything lost: food, tools, shelter, hope. But dwelling on that isn't helpful. Focus forward. Water, fire. Historians still argue whether the psychological shock and disorientation immediately following a shipwreck hampered survivors' ability to make rational, life-saving decisions in those crucial first hours and days, or if the sheer, brutal necessity of the situation imposed a clear and effective focus on the most critical survival tasks. For you, right now, there's not much room for complex decision-making. It boils down to very simple, primal needs. Find water, find a way to make fire. Everything else is secondary. You stumble over a hidden rock, catching yourself before you fall. The ground is treacherous under the thick grass. The sheer physical effort is draining, especially on an empty stomach and with a body that feels like it's been through a washing machine. But you have to keep going. The island is silent except for the wind and your own ragged breathing. The vastness of your task is overwhelming if you think about it too much. Better to break it down. Step 1, walk uphill, look for water. Step 2, search for dry fuel. Step 3, figure out how on earth to make a spark. You reach a small, rocky outcrop higher up the slope. No sign of water here, just more tussock grass and rocks. But you can see a bit further now. The island seems to stretch inland for a while, rising towards a low, rounded peak shrouded in mist. It looks barren and unwelcoming. No trees, no signs of civilization. Just rock and hardy vegetation. You sigh again, a puff of white mist in the cold air. Okay, no obvious water source immediately visible. Time to keep moving, keep looking. The thirst is a constant, irritating reminder of the urgency. You need to find water, and you need to find it soon. The clock is ticking. You continue the uphill climb, pushing through the dense, scratchy tussock grass that tugs at your clothes and scrapes against your exposed skin. Each step is an effort, a small victory against the fatigue and the persistent chill that seems to have settled deep in your bones. The sun, if it's even out there, is hidden behind the thick blanket of gray clouds, offering no warmth, just a dim, diffused light that makes the landscape appear even more monochrome and bleak. Your throat feels drier with every ragged breath you take. It's the kind of thirst that makes your tongue feel too large for your mouth, a desperate, primal need that overrides almost everything else. You fantasize about a cold glass of water, maybe with some ice, or even just that slightly chlorinated tap water you always took for granted. Ah, simpler times. You keep scanning the ground, looking for any break in the terrain, any patch of ground that looks wetter, darker, or supports different vegetation that might indicate underground water. You listen too, hoping against hope to catch the faint sound of trickling water, a gurgle, anything but the sighing wind and the distant roar of the waves. The island is frustratingly silent otherwise, except for the occasional cry of a seabird circling high above. It's vast and empty, and finding something as small as a seep or a puddle feels like trying to find a specific grain of sand on a huge beach. You traverse a rocky section, scrambling over slippery, moss-covered boulders. The wind is stronger here, higher up, and it whips around you, chilling you further. You pull your damp jacket tighter, a futile gesture. This is starting to feel less like an adventure and more like a really poorly planned extreme camping trip. Like you forgot everything. Tent? Nope. Sleeping bag? Definitely nope. Water filter? Don't be silly. It's almost comical how unprepared you are, if it weren't for the fact that, you might actually die. As you crest a small rise, the ground ahead dips into a shallow depression. The tussock grass looks even thicker here, a vibrant, almost artificial green compared to the dull yellow-green elsewhere. And there, nestled among the grass, is a patch of standing water. Your heart gives a little lurch of hope, immediately followed by a wave of disappointment. It's not a bubbling spring or a clear stream. It's more of a boggy area, a muddy, stagnant pool perhaps a few feet across. The water is dark, murky, covered in a thin film, and you can see little insect larvae wiggling near the edges. Yeah, questionable is putting it mildly. This water looks less like a lifesaver and more like a fast track to a miserable bout of gastrointestinal distress. Or worse. You kneel down by the edge of the pool, examining it closely. The smell isn't great, earthy, damp, vaguely unpleasant. It certainly doesn't smell fresh. But your thirst is a physical ache, a burning in your throat. Every instinct is screaming at you to just cup your hands and drink. Just a little, to take the edge off. But the rational part of your brain, the part that remembers basic biology and survival advice, is recoiling in horror. This water is almost certainly teeming with bacteria, parasites, who knows what else from the island environment. Drinking it straight is a gamble, and in a survival situation, getting sick is incredibly dangerous. Diarrhea and vomiting would lead to even faster dehydration, putting you in a far worse state. Historically, survivors of all kinds of disasters, from shipwrecks to overland expeditions gone wrong, faced this exact dilemma. They understood that stagnant water or water from bogs carried risks, but in extremis, the immediate threat of dehydration often outweighed the potential for future illness. Many accounts describe people forcing themselves to drink foul-tasting or obviously contaminated water, because the alternative was certain death from thirst. It's a grim calculus, prioritizing the most immediate threat. You eye the murky water, then look back up the featureless slope. Was there anything better further on? No obvious signs. Was there any way to make this water safe? Only one way you know, boiling it. And that brings you right back to the problem of fire. You need fire to boil water, but you need water to survive long enough to find fuel and make fire. It's a cruel circular trap. You need to find a way to get fire started, and quickly, before this questionable puddle becomes your only unavoidable option. A quirky tidbit about historical water sources in unexpected places. Sailors knew that fresh water could sometimes be found inside. Large pieces of pack ice or icebergs in polar regions, melted from compressed snow or rain that had frozen. They would chip away at the ice specifically to access these pockets of potable water. Not super relevant to this temperate Sub-Antarctic island, but it shows the ingenuity driven by desperate thirst. Your murky puddle feels significantly less majestic than an iceberg. You stand up, forcing yourself away from the edge of the pool. No, not yet. You have to try and find dry fuel and figure out fire first. Drinking this now would be a last resort, when the alternative is literally collapsing from dehydration. You make a mental note of the location of this boggy patch. It's here if you absolutely need it, but the priority remains unchanged. Fire. Historians still argue whether the widespread knowledge of basic survival techniques, like the necessity of boiling questionable water, or the methods for starting friction fires, was truly common among ordinary seamen or land travelers in past centuries, or if such skills were primarily confined to professional explorers, indigenous peoples, or specialized woodsmen. It's hard to know just how much practical survival knowledge the average shipwrecked sailor in the 18th or 19th century would realistically possess beyond what was needed for their specific job aboard ship. For you, right now, your knowledge is a blend of half-remembered nature documentaries, scout handbooks, and maybe that one time you tried to rub two sticks together as a kid. Spoiler, it didn't work. You turn away from the boggy patch, the image of the murky water seared into your mind. It's a constant, unwelcome temptation. You continue your slow traverse across the slope, keeping an eye out for anything that looks remotely dry or combustible. The tussock grass is damp at the base, the rocks are cold and wet. The wind seems determined to leach every bit of warmth and moisture from the land. Finding dry tinder and fuel on this island feels increasingly like a Herculean task. But you found water, even if it's bad water. That's one piece of the puzzle. Now for the much, much harder piece, fire. Your numb fingers already ache at the thought of the fine motor control required for friction fire methods. But what choice do you have? You need fire, you need it now, and you need it from scratch. The clock isn't just ticking, it's practically shouting. So you've left the questionable puddle behind, the image of its murky surface stubbornly refusing to leave your mind. The priority is fire, now more than ever. You scan the landscape with renewed intensity, your eyes darting from patch to patch of tussock grass, scanning the rocky outcrops, searching for anything that looks dry enough to burn. You know the basics. You need tinder, kindling, and fuel. Tinder is the fine stuff that catches a spark or ember. Think fluff, dry moss, shredded bark. Kindling is slightly larger, twigs and small branches. Fuel is the bigger stuff that keeps the fire going. The problem? Every potential bit of tinder you find is damp. You pull at the base of the tussock grass, wet. You examine moss growing on the rocks, spongy and soaked. You check under overhangs, maybe slightly less wet, but still far from dry. You feel like you're trying to find a genuinely enthusiastic morning person on a Monday. Doesn't exist. You try scraping the outer layer off some dead stalks, hoping the inside is drier, but it's a slow, fiddly process, and the results are minimal and still feel cool to the touch. Nothing is crisp or brittle. Everything bends or squishes slightly. You spend what feels like hours trudging across the slope, hands constantly searching, testing, discarding. Your fingers are getting cold and numb from the dampness and the chill wind. You gather a small, sad pile of the least wet materials you can find. Some compressed, brownish grass pulled from under a rock, a few thin, grayish stalks that look sort of dead. It's a pathetic collection. It feels less like laying the groundwork for survival and more like preparing a really, really depressing salad for a snail. With your meager collection assembled in a relatively sheltered spot behind a boulder, you consider your fire-starting options. You don't have matches, you don't have a lighter, you definitely don't have a ferro rod or any modern gadgets. All you have are your hands, whatever nature provides, and hopefully some half-remembered physics lessons. Friction fire is the classic method, rubbing two pieces of wood together to generate heat. The hand drill, the bow drill, the fire plow, all variations on a theme. But they all require dry wood, preferably hardwoods, in a lot of practice. And you have, well, damp, soft, weirdly fibrous island plant matter. You pick up a somewhat straighter piece of dead stalk about the length of your forearm and a flatter piece to use as a base. You try the hand drill method, twirling the straight piece rapidly between your palms, pressing the tip into a small depression you make in the base piece. You try to apply downward pressure and spin at the same time, but the stalk is uneven, your hands are cold and clumsy, and the material just doesn't seem to want to cooperate. It wobbles, it slips, and after a minute of frantic, awkward spinning, you've generated absolutely nothing remotely resembling smoke or heat, just slightly smudged plant matter. Your palms are starting to sting, but not with heat from friction, just from the rough stalk. You switch tactics. Maybe a fire plow? You find a longer, sturdier looking piece and try rubbing its pointed end vigorously up and down a groove carved in the base piece. This requires less coordination than the hand drill, but more brute force in a consistent rhythm. You put your back into it, sawing away, generating just a tiny amount of dust that immediately looks damp and lifeless. No smoke, no ember. Your arm starts to ache within minutes. This isn't working either. You half expect a little cartoon puff of smoke to appear above your head, labeled failure. It's incredibly frustrating. You've seen this done in documentaries, in movies. People just seem to make fire happen with relative ease, often with a dramatic flourish. The reality is a lot more sweaty, painful, and usually ends with no fire at all, just tired arms and a profound respect for anyone who ever managed to start a fire before matches were invented. You realize with a sinking feeling that the materials you have are just fundamentally unsuitable. They're too damp, too soft, they don't generate enough friction, or the heat they do generate is immediately absorbed by the surrounding moisture. It's like trying to knit a sweater using the cooked spaghetti. Technically possible, maybe, but utterly impractical and guaranteed to result in a mess. Historically, obtaining fire in challenging environments was often the single most difficult survival task. Expeditions venturing into damp or cold climates frequently carried tinderboxes with flint and steel, or even magnifying glasses to use the sun. Recognizing that relying on friction alone with available wet materials was a gamble you couldn't afford. The knowledge of which specific woods worked best for friction fire was crucial, often passed down through generations in cultures that relied on it daily. For a shipwrecked sailor or a European explorer accustomed to carrying fire-starting tools, being stranded without them in a wet environment would have been terrifying. You can almost feel the weight of that historical anxiety now, layered onto your own aching muscles and cold fingers. You try one more thing. You remember reading about finding really dry, fine materials. You meticulously pull apart some of the damp grass, trying to fluff it up, separate the fibers. You rub a small bundle between your hands, hoping the friction will dry it out and make it receptive to an ember. If you could even create one, it just feels like you're making a slightly less damp wad of grass. It's utterly disheartening. Your optimism is rapidly being eroded by the relentless reality of wet island flora. A quirky tidbit about fire. The Moken people, sometimes called sea nomads in Southeast Asia, traditionally kept fires burning constantly on their houseboats, even while at sea. They would build earth or sand hearths on the decks. This highlights how difficult obtaining fire could be, and that maintaining a continuous flame was sometimes seen as easier than restarting one from scratch in a damp, maritime environment. Your attempts to start fire from scratch on this island are definitely making their strategy seem incredibly sensible right about now. You slump back against the boulder, watching the weak light fade slightly as the persistent clouds refuse to break. The wind bites. You wrap your arms around yourself, trying to conserve warmth. The thirst is still there, a dull throb, but the immediate pressing failure of getting fire has taken over. Without fire, you can't boil the questionable water you found. Without fire, you can't dry out materials to make a better attempt at friction fire. Without fire, you have no warmth, no way to signal, no morale boost. It feels like every path forward leads back to this single, insurmountable problem with the resources you have. Historians still argue whether certain fire-starting techniques, particularly the bow drill or hand drill, were independently invented in multiple locations across the globe or spread through cultural diffusion. While friction fire methods are found worldwide, the specific tools and materials used vary, leading to fascinating debates about ancient human ingenuity and contact. For you, right now, the historical debate is fascinating, but utterly useless. You just need any method to work, and none of them are. You feel a cold knot of despair tightening in your stomach. The island, which moments ago just felt inhospitable, now feels actively hostile, deliberately withholding the one thing you desperately need. You have to find a way. You just don't know what it is. Okay, deep breaths. That humiliating failure to make even a flicker of smoke in Section 7 needs to be put aside. Dwelling on it won't dry the tinder. The cold is starting to seep deeper now, not just a surface chill, but a dull ache in your bones. And the thirst? It's still there, a low hum beneath the roar of the wind and the static of your thoughts. You couldn't boil the water because you couldn't make fire. You couldn't make fire because the materials were too wet. Therefore, the logical, mind-numbingly boring next step is to find or create less wet materials. Simple, right? Like trying to explain Wi-Fi to a badger. You stand up, stretching sore muscles. Your hands feel raw from the pathetic attempts at friction fire. Time for a strategic retreat and a new search. You need to look where the rain and persistent damp haven't reached as easily. This means higher ground perhaps, or deep within dense clumps of vegetation, or under large sheltering rocks that form small, dry pockets. You scan the landscape again, this time with a more focused intent, looking for those potential dry havens. You trudge uphill slightly towards a cluster of larger boulders you spotted earlier. Maybe there's something sheltered there. The wind whips around you and you pull your jacket tighter. The ground is still spongy underfoot, the tussock grass matted and damp. You reach the boulders, a jumble of gray, lichen-covered rock. You explore the spaces between them, ducking under overhangs. It's definitely drier here. The air feels less heavy with moisture. There are dead leaves and stalks accumulated in these sheltered spots. Hope flickers, tiny and fragile. You get down on your hands and knees, sifting through the debris. It's still not bone dry, not like the crisp leaves you'd find in an autumn forest, but it's a definite improvement. The leaves are brittle enough to crumble slightly when you rub them. The stalks snap rather than bend. This is it. This is what you needed. You start gathering this less damp material, stuffing handfuls into your pockets, creating a small pile on a relatively flat, dry rock surface. It's still far from perfect. It feels maybe 60% dry instead of 10% dry, but that 50% difference feels like winning the lottery after your previous failures. While you're painstakingly gathering, you remember a quirky tidbit about how some indigenous peoples in damp climates would carry a smoldering ember from a previous fire with them, wrapped in bark or packed in a slow-burning material, just to avoid the difficulty of starting one from scratch. It was easier to keep a fire alive than to make a new one. You briefly entertain the idea of finding a lightning-struck tree or a volcanic vent emitting smoke, but then you remember where you are and sigh. No natural fires waiting to be nurtured here. It's all on you. You spend another significant chunk of time on this task, meticulously searching every nook and cranny of the boulder cluster, then moving on to a particularly thick patch of tussock grass that seems to offer some protection from the wind and rain. Getting down low, threading your hands deep into the base of the clump, you find material that's compressed and slightly drier towards the center. It feels like you're performing surgery on a giant, grassy, damp pillow. You pull out handfuls of this, adding it to your growing collection. It's still fibrous and not ideal tinder, but maybe, just maybe, it could work as kindling if you get lucky with a really good ember. Historians still argue whether certain types of fungi, specifically various bracket fungi or polypores, were intentionally used as tinder by prehistoric humans, or if their use was discovered later. Some types, when dried and prepared correctly, are excellent at catching a spark and holding an ember. You eye the damp, slimy-looking fungi growing on some rocks nearby. You have no idea which ones, if any, might be suitable, and they look thoroughly waterlogged anyway. Probably best to stick to the slightly less wet plant matter for now. You're not in the mood for experimental fungal fire starting, or worse, accidental poisoning because you touched the wrong mushroom. You continue gathering, trying to separate the materials into categories. The finest, crumblier stuff for potential tinder, slightly larger twigs and stalks for kindling, and larger but still damp pieces for fuel. The process is slow and requires patience. You're constantly battling the temptation to just grab everything, but you know that damp material will just suffocate a nascent flame. You need the driest bits possible. It feels like you're sorting laundry after a flood. Everything is damp, but some things are less damp, and you have yet to figure out which is which. You're developing a profound respect for the sheer, unglamorous effort that goes into basic survival tasks. It's not all dramatic animal encounters and epic journeys. A huge portion of it is just tedious, cold, damp searching and gathering. It's the kind of thing that would make for a terribly boring reality show, unless you added dramatic music every time you found a slightly dry twig. Sound effect idea, incredibly dramatic orchestral sting. He found yawn, a dry twig. A mainstream historical fact about fire is that the development of specialized tools like the fire piston, independently invented in Southeast Asia and later reinvented in Europe, represented a significant technological leap for obtaining firebrand quickly using rapid air compression. This was a far cry from the hit-or-miss methods you're currently struggling with. Think of the fire piston as the espresso machine of ancient fire starting. Fast, efficient, and required specific, well-made components. You, on the other hand, are still trying to rub two soggy napkins together. You gather your precious, slightly less wet collection and carry it back to your sheltered spot near the boulder. It's not a huge pile, maybe enough for one or two serious attempts. It looks like a bird's nest that failed its construction exams. You spend some time trying to further process the materials, rubbing the finer stuff between your palms to try and generate a tiny bit of heat and theoretically dry it further, or just break it down into finer fibers. You scrape the outer bark off some of the stalks with your fingernails, hoping the inner core is drier. It's painstaking work, and your fingers are still numb. You look at your pathetic pile. It's better than the last attempt, but the doubt is still there. The material still feels cool to the touch, a constant reminder of the pervasive moisture. You remember reading about how crucial psychological state is in survival situations. Maintaining hope, staying busy, focusing on small tasks. These are all vital. Right now, the tediousness of gathering slightly less wet material is keeping you busy. But the deep-seated worry about whether it will actually work is a heavy weight. It feels like you're preparing for a crucial job interview by ironing a paper bag. You're doing something, but is it the right thing? You arrange the finest fibers into a loose bird's nest shape, the tinder bundle. You prepare a few thinner pieces to feed into it once it catches, the kindling. You lay out some larger bits nearby, the fuel. It's the textbook setup, but with substandard damp components. It's like trying to build a gourmet sandwich with stale bread and mystery meat. You know the steps, but the ingredients are questionable. The sun is starting to dip lower towards the horizon, although you can't see it through the clouds. The light is fading and the temperature is dropping. The pressure to succeed in this next attempt is mounting. Okay, so you've got your slightly less damp collection, your sad little bird's nest of questionable tinder, your dampish kindling, and your just plain damp fuel. It's not much, but it feels like a fortune compared to the soaking wet stuff you had before. There's a flicker of renewed hope, a tiny brave candle flame in the vast damp cave of your current situation. You return to your sheltered spot, the wind still howling outside but less biting under the overhang. You get out your fireboard and spindle again. They're still damp, of course. Wood takes a long time to truly dry, especially in this kind of persistent moisture. But maybe, just maybe, the friction can help dry them out as you work. It's a nice thought anyway. Like thinking you can dry your socks by running really fast. You position the fireboard, kneeling down with one foot holding it steady. You take the spindle, the tip slightly charred from the previous attempt. You settle the handhold over the top, applying downward pressure. Here we go again. The same motion, the same physical effort, but this time with slightly higher stakes and slightly better materials. You start turning the spindle, slowly at first, building a rhythm, back and forth, back and forth. The wood grinds against itself, a low monotonous sound accompanying the roar of the wind. Your hands are already protesting, the skin tender from the last attempt, but you ignore it. This is important. This is everything. You pick up the pace. Faster now. The grinding gets a little louder. You focus on keeping steady downward pressure while moving your hands back and forth on the spindle. It's tiring, repetitive work. Your arms and shoulders start to ache. Your lungs burn from the exertion. You can feel a tiny bit of heat developing where the spindle meets the board, a faint warmth that feels incredibly significant. It's like detecting a single-degree rise in temperature during an ice age. Progress, maybe. You keep going, eyes focused on the point of contact. A small pile of dark dust starts to accumulate in the notch you carved. This is good. This dust is created by the friction, and ideally it should heat up and become charcoal, eventually forming an ember. The key is getting enough dust and getting it hot enough without losing your rhythm or letting the spindle slip. It requires concentration, physical stamina, and a healthy dose of blind optimism. You remember a mainstream historical fact. Evidence suggests humans have been using fire for at least 1 million years, with controlled use dating back hundreds of thousands of years. The ability to make fire on demand, rather than just opportunistically using natural fires, was a pivotal moment in human history, enabling cooking, warmth, protection, and tool-making. Think about that. Your ancestors mastered this skill when they were dodging mammoths and arguing about the best way to chip flint. And here you are, struggling with damp wood like some kind of time-traveling amateur. The dust pile is growing. It's a dark, rich brown, almost black. You lean closer, trying to detect any hint of smoke. The smell of damp, grinding wood is in the air, but nothing else yet. Your muscles are screaming now. Your breathing is heavy. You resist the urge to stop and rest. Not yet. Not until you see something, anything promising. It's like trying to assemble flat-pack furniture when half the screws are missing. Frustrating, physically demanding, and you're pretty sure you're doing it wrong, but you have to keep pushing. You increase the friction again, pushing down harder, moving faster. The dust pile is bigger now, curling slightly out of the notch. You keep your head low, watching intently. The wood feels warmer beneath your hands. Is that just the heat from your body, or is it real heat? You peer closer, and then you see it. A wisp of something faint rising from the dust pile. Not thick, acrid smoke like from a campfire, but a thin, almost transparent curl. And a smell. A faint, acrid scent of charring wood. Smoke! Actual, real smoke. Your heart leaps into your throat. This is it. This could be it. You redouble your efforts, grinding with renewed vigor. The smoke increases slightly, becoming more visible. The dust pile seems to be darkening further. You can almost feel the heat radiating from that tiny point. You picture the ember forming, a tiny glowing eye in the dark dust. It feels so close, so incredibly close. This is where it gets tricky. Maintaining the heat, getting that dust pile hot enough to ignite into an ember, but not pushing so hard that the spindle stops turning smoothly or the friction point gets clogged. It's a delicate balance. You ease up slightly on the pressure, keeping the speed high. Keep that dust piling up. Keep it hot. You can almost hear the wood whispering, "Come on, you can do it." Or maybe that's just the wind in your oxygen-starved brain. You recall a quirky tidbit about the Dani people of New Guinea, who traditionally use fire saws, sawing a strip of rattan or bamboo across a stationary piece of wood until friction ignited the dust. Different technique, same fundamental principle. Turn work into heat until something catches. It highlights the ingenuity and variety of fire-starting methods developed by cultures across the globe, all without matches or lighters. You keep going. The smoke is still there, a thin, persistent stream. The dust pile looks promising. You can feel the heat through the board. It feels like the culmination of everything: the cold, the hunger, the thirst, the frustrating searches, the previous failures. It's all riding on this moment, on this tiny potential ember. Historians still argue whether the control of fire led directly to significant physiological changes in early humans, such as smaller jaws and teeth due to softer cooked food, or if these changes were already underway due to other dietary shifts. The debate highlights the profound, long-term impact fire had beyond just warmth and protection. Cooking food unlocked more nutrients and reduced the energy needed for digestion, potentially freeing up energy for brain development. Imagine that. Cooking dinner might have literally made us smarter. Makes you feel even more foolish for struggling with a bit of damp wood. You grind away, the smoke a constant, tantalizing promise. You're almost out of breath. Your arms are burning. The spindle feels slick with sweat and grime. You keep your eyes glued to the dust. It's so dark now, so much of it. Come on, Ember, come on! You think about the small, tinder bundle you prepared. The slightly less damp fibers arranged into a nest. That's the next critical step. If you get an ember, you need to gently tap the hot dust into that tinder bundle and then carefully blow on it to coax the ember into a flame. It requires a steady hand and lungs full of air, neither of which you feel like you have right now. You give one final desperate push, gritting your teeth. The spindle squeals against the board. The dust pile, is it glowing? You lean in closer, squinting through the faint smoke. And then, Just as the burn in your muscles becomes unbearable, just as the smoke seems to thicken for a fraction of a second, it dissipates. The dust pile sits there, dark and inert. No glow, no ember. The heat fades almost instantly. You stop, panting, staring at the dark dust. Nothing. Another failure. Not a complete failure. You got smoke, you got heat, you got a decent dust pile. It was closer than last time, but still no fire. The slight hope you felt a few minutes ago evaporates like the smoke you just created. You sink back onto your heels, utterly exhausted and profoundly disappointed. The cold feels even colder now. The silence after you stop working is deafening, punctuated only by the relentless wind. You look at the dark, lifeless dust. So much effort, so little to show for it. It feels like trying to power a skyscraper with a hamster wheel. You've done the work, but the energy just isn't translating into the desired outcome. You sigh, a long, shaky breath. Okay, not this way, not yet. Time to rethink. You slump back against the cold, damp rock wall, the useless fire-making kit abandoned in front of you. The dark, inert dust pile is a tiny, silent monument to your failure. That brief flicker of hope, the almost there moment when you saw the smoke, has completely extinguished, leaving only the familiar, gnawing chill and the heavy cloak of disappointment. Your arms ache, your hands are sore, and you've used up precious energy for nothing. It feels like you ran a marathon to get to a locked door. You stare out from under the overhang. The wind is still relentless, whipping spray into the air even from a distance. Everything outside looks gray, cold, and wet. Everything inside your little shelter feels gray, cold, and wet too. Your clothes are still damp, clinging uncomfortably. The air you breathe is heavy with moisture. This persistent dampness, you realize, is the real enemy here, more so than the cold itself. It's leaching the heat from you, and it's preventing you from creating the heat you desperately need. That friction fire method, while proven over millennia, requires dry, or at least mostly dry, materials. The spindle needs to generate enough friction to create fine dust, and that dust needs to get hot enough to char and form an ember. But if the wood is damp, the friction creates steam instead of heat, or the dust clumps up into a paste, or it just doesn't get hot enough to ignite. You were working with compromised materials from the start, no matter how much you tried to dry them. It was like trying to boil water with a handle. Fundamentally the wrong tool for the re under these specific, soaking wet conditions. You pick up the fireboard, running a numb finger over the dark smudge of dust. It's just wood dust, nothing more. You think back to all the survival guides, all the campfire stories. They always start with finding dry tinder and kindling. That's presented as step one, as obvious as putting on pants before leaving the house. But what if you can't find anything dry? What if the entire world around you is saturated? That's the grim reality you're facing. Your slightly less damp collection wasn't less damp enough. The sheer frustration is a physical weight in your chest. You did everything right, followed the steps, put in the effort. But the fundamental conditions were wrong. It's like trying to build a sandcastle during a tsunami. You could be the best sandcastle architect in the world, but it's not going to happen. You need a different approach. You need something that doesn't rely on bone-dry wood and perfect friction in a freezing, humid environment. This situation forces you to think outside the conventional survival box. Friction fire failed. Carrying fire isn't an option because you don't have any. Reflective surfaces for solar ignition are obviously useless under these perpetual gray skies. Chemical methods? What chemicals? You have pockets full of wet lint and existential dread, not potassium permanganate and glycerin. You remember a mainstream historical fact. Arctic explorers and indigenous peoples in wet, cold climates developed specialized methods for fire starting, often involving carefully preserved dry materials carried with them, like birch bark, and sometimes using alternative ignition methods like flint and steel, if available, which can be more forgiving of dampness than friction fire, though still challenging. They understood that simply relying on finding usable materials on the spot wasn't always possible in extreme conditions. Your situation is proving that lesson the hard way. Okay, so the materials are the problem, the wind is the problem, the constant moisture is the problem. You can't change the weather and you can't magically conjure dry wood, dude. So what can you do? You look around your minimal shelter, the damp rock walls, the patches of wet moss, the discarded soggy seaweed you considered eating earlier. Nothing here screams fire fuel. Your mind starts to wander down increasingly desperate paths. Could you use something else as fuel? Something that might burn even when damp? What about oil? Fat? If you could catch something, could you extract oil? But you haven't seen any creatures other than those elusive birds. And they're not exactly dripping in blubber. Plus, you still need an ignition source. You're back to square one, but with the added bonus of feeling completely drained. You recall a quirky tidbit about historical survival stories. There are accounts of people trying to burn incredibly unlikely things out of sheer desperation. Animal hides, shoes, even their own hair. Not recommended, probably just smells awful. These weren't necessarily efficient fuels, but attempts born of the absolute need for warmth or a signal fire. It highlights the extent people will go to when conventional options are exhausted. Burning your boots might not keep you warm for long, but the thought crosses your mind in a moment of despair. You huddle deeper into yourself, trying to conserve warmth. The cold seems to be seeping into your very bones. The idea of a warm fire, a hot meal, dry clothes, it feels like a distant, impossible dream. The silence, broken only by the wind, feels heavy with your failure. Historians still argue whether the psychological impact of isolation and repeated failure is a greater immediate threat in survival situations than the physical hardships themselves. The debate centers on how quickly despair and loss of hope can lead to critical errors or a complete surrender to the elements, even when physical resources might technically still allow for survival if the will to continue were present. Right now, you feel that psychological weight pressing down on you. That brief spark of hope from seeing the smoke made the subsequent failure sting even more. You need a new plan, a radically different plan. One that acknowledges the fundamental problem of universal dampness. Maybe you can't make a fire with what you have, the traditional way. Maybe you have to process the materials differently. Or maybe you have to consider things you would never normally consider flammable. This island is offering you no easy answers, no conveniently dry tinder bundles waiting under a rock. It's presenting you with a harsh reality: adapt or perish. And standard campfire techniques, it seems, are not adapted for this particular hell. You have to start thinking about the absolute limits of resourcefulness. What happens when you have literally nothing dry to work with? What extreme measures might be necessary? The cold silence of the shelter feels heavier now, thick with the weight of your failed attempt. That small pile of dark dust mocks you. Fire, the most basic and transformative of survival tools, remains stubbornly out of reach. Your hands, raw from the spindle, feel useless. The cold isn't just outside, it's a creeping tide starting deep inside your core. And the hunger has moved beyond a rumble to a dull, constant ache that distracts your thoughts, making everything feel just a little bit fuzzy around the edges. You can't stay here huddled in damp misery. You need to move, to search again. But what are you even searching for? You've scoured the beach for anything edible, seaweed, maybe a stray mollusk, although the waves are too rough for easy foraging. You've looked under rocks for scurrying things, nothing substantial. You've assessed the sparse vegetation, recognizing nothing immediately edible or useful for fire. This time, you force yourself to return to the chaotic fringe where the ocean's violence met the land, the shipwrecked debris field. It's a grim, tangled mess of broken wood, twisted metal, ripped canvas, and unrecognizable detritus, all slick with salt water and draped with kelp. It smells of decay and the sea. It's dangerous too, full of sharp edges and unstable pieces, but it represents your only chance of finding something manufactured, something that might offer a shortcut, a tool, or a resource that nature isn't providing on this desolate rock. Picking your way through the wreckage is slow, hazardous work. You have to watch your step constantly, avoid snagging your already fragile clothes, and brace against the wind whipping spray off the waves crashing nearby. You poke through splintered crates, look under tangled fishing nets, maybe afloat anything buoyant. You pull at a length of rope, hoping it might be long and strong enough for something, anything. It snaps brittly in your freezing hands. You find a smashed wooden bucket, useless. A single broken oar, a waterlogged boot, definitely not yours. A piece of canvas sail, stiff and heavy with water. None of it seems immediately helpful. Your fingers are clumsy with the cold, fumbling over textures. Rough wood, smooth metal, slimy seaweed. It's like searching through a gigantic, saltwater-logged junk drawer that actively wants to injure you. You remember a mainstream historical fact. Shipwreck survivors throughout history have often relied heavily on salvaged goods from their wreck. Tools, food stores, if any survived, fabric for shelter or clothing, wood for fire or repair. The wreck itself could be a lifeline, providing resources that were scarce or impossible to find in the natural environment of their unplanned landing spot. Your situation isn't unique in this desperate scavenging. You continue to push deeper into the debris, closer to the high tide line where the heaviest pieces were thrown. You're not sure what you were looking for anymore. Just something. Anything different from the endless rock, moss, and water. You kick at a pile of seaweed tangled around a large, dark object. It's too heavy to be just seaweed. You grab hold and pull, your muscles protesting. It's yielding, sort of, but tough. As you clear away the marine growth, the object reveals itself. It's a piece of thick material, dark brown, stiff but flexible in places. It's not wood, not metal, not fabric like canvas. It feels organic but processed. It's a large piece, maybe a yard square, torn at the edges. As you rub some of the grime off, you see stitching holes along one side. And the smell, it's a distinct, earthy, slightly acrid smell mixed with a pervasive salt and damp. You realize what it is. Leather, a thick, heavy piece of leather, perhaps part of a sail cover, a protective tarp, or even some kind of specialized marine gear. It's soaked through, heavy and cold in your hands. Your first thought is disappointment. Leather? What good is leather? You can't eat it. Not like this. It's certainly not going to burn, especially not soaking wet. Your brief surge of interest drains away, leaving only the persistent ache of cold and hunger. Just more useless junk from the sea. It's like finding a soggy armchair when you need a lifeboat. You almost toss it aside, another heavy, useless thing. But something makes you hesitate. It's a large piece, durable. Maybe it could be part of a better shelter? A ground cover? Not particularly insulating when wet, though. Still, it's different. It's not just rock or plant, it's something made. You recall a quirky tidbit you once heard. Sometimes in desperate survival situations, people have found uses for materials you'd never expect. There are stories, for instance, of sailors using canvas or leather to fashion crude flotation devices, or even attempts to distill saltwater using sailcloth in a pot, though that's incredibly difficult and often yields too little fresh water to be useful. The sheer creativity born of desperation is astounding. Could this leather be used for something other than its intended purpose? You drag the heavy, sodden hide back towards your meager shelter, leaving a dark, wet trail on the sand. It takes effort, each step a reminder of your depleted state. But you have it, this large, damp, arguably useless piece of animal skin. It sits on the floor of your shelter, a dark, unpromising shape. It doesn't solve your fire problem. It doesn't solve your food problem. Historians still argue whether chance discovery or systematic searching is more often the key to finding crucial resources in survival scenarios. Does success come from sheer luck, stumbling upon something vital, or from a methodical approach that covers all possibilities, however unlikely? In your case, it felt like a bit of both. A desperate, unsystematic search led you to stumble upon this unexpected material. Was it luck, or just the inevitable result of sifting through everything available? As you sit there looking at the leather, the hunger pangs seem to sharpen. Your mind, deprived of easy solutions, starts to wander into strange territories. Edible? No, not raw. Processed? Could it be processed? Leather is tough, indigestible protein. But isn't protein, food? You've heard of indigenous cultures using every part of an animal. Could leather in some extreme circumstance be rendered palatable? Even nutritious? It seems like a disgusting, far-fetched idea. But then again, so does surviving long-term on this island without fire or rescue. The leather sits there, a damp, enigmatic possibility in the flickering twilight. It's not food, but maybe, just maybe, it could become something else. Something you desperately need. The leather sits there, heavy and damp, radiating a cold, unpromising energy. Your eyes keep drifting back to it, even as you try to distract yourself with rearranging the few damp possessions you have. The wind whistles outside, a constant, mournful sound. And inside, the hunger is a gnawing beast. It's not just a physical sensation anymore. It's a constant, low hum in your consciousness, a filter through which you see the world. Every rock looks vaguely like a potential source of food. It isn't. Every sound could be something edible scurrying by. It isn't. Your brain feels sluggish, yet hyper-focused on one thing: calories. That's why the leather keeps drawing your gaze. It's something, it's material. It's protein technically, isn't it? Animal hide, covered in hair originally, probably scraped off, tanned somehow, though how this piece was processed on a ship, you can't guess. It's incredibly tough, leathery, hence the name. You can't chew it. You couldn't digest it if you did. Your stomach rebels at the very idea of trying to gnaw on this cold, brine-soaked thing. But the hunger, it pushes at the boundaries of what seems rational, what seems possible. What if you could break it down? What if you could make it less leather? Your mind, operating on survival instinct and a desperate need for energy, latches onto a vague notion. Boiling. Doesn't boiling break things down? Turn tough things soft, release nutrients? You picture bones simmering to make broth, tough cuts of meat softening with heat and time. Could you do that with leather? It's a horrifying, disgusting thought. Boiling your essentially eating a belt. It feels profoundly wrong, a desperate measure beyond comprehension in your normal life. You might joke about eating your hat when you're hungry back home, but you never actually consider the mechanics. Now, looking at this large piece of hide, the mechanics of making it digestible suddenly feel terrifyingly relevant. It's like a bizarre, post-apocalyptic cooking show where the secret ingredient is, well, leather. Chef's kiss, maybe not. Okay, deep breaths. If you were going to attempt this unthinkable act, how would you even do it? First, you need to boil it. And to boil it, you need three things: water, a container to put the water and the leather in, and heat. Water is easy enough, the ocean is full of it, though you'll need to desalinate it somehow before drinking it, which is a whole other impossible problem. But for boiling leather, maybe salt water would even work? It might help break it down faster, or maybe it would just make it taste even more horrendous. You stash that question away for later. Right now, the immediate problem is the container and the heat. Heat is still your nemesis. Your last attempt at fire was a complete, disheartening failure. The tinder was damp, the friction heat wasn't enough, the wind was unforgiving. But maybe you don't need a roaring bonfire. Maybe you just need some heat, concentrated. A small, struggling flame held close to a pot. Yes, a pot, or anything that can hold liquid and be heated. This becomes your new singular focus. Back to the shipwreck debris you go. The wind is still whipping, the spray stinging your face, but the cold dread has been replaced by the frantic energy of this new desperate plan. You pick through the detritus with more purpose, now specifically searching for something, anything made of metal, capable of holding water, and sturdy enough to withstand heat. You're wading through tangled ropes and broken timbers, the footing treacherous. You stub your toe on something hard, buried in the sand. You dig with your hands, the sand icy and abrasive. It's a piece of bent metal sheeting. Useless. You find a shattered wooden cask. Useless. A coil of rusty wire. Useless. Your hands are scraped and bleeding, slightly, numb with cold. It's like shopping in the world's worst hardware store. where everything is broken and smells like dead fish. You push further along the high tide line where the bigger pieces settled. There, buried under a pile of weed and half submerged in a shallow pool left by the receding tide, is a curved piece of metal. You heave at it. It's heavy. You pull it free. It's battered, dented, but it holds its shape. It looks like part of a galley pot, or maybe a small kettle minus its handle and lid. It's blackened on the bottom, probably from years of shipboard cooking. It's perfect, or at least it's a container. It's perhaps 8 inches across, maybe 6 inches deep, enough to hold some water and a few strips of leather. It feels like finding gold, even though it's just rusty metal soup pot fragment. You clutch the pot fragment and make your way back to the shelter. Now you have the container. Next, the leather. You lay the pot on the ground next to the hide. The leather is still cold and stiff. You need to cut it into smaller pieces to fit in the pot. You look for something sharp. Your small salvage knife is still your most precious tool. You unfold the rusty blade. Cutting this thick, dense material is going to be a challenge. It's like trying to carve a car tire with a butter knife. You press the blade down, sawing back and forth. It's slow, agonizing work. The leather resists, the fibers tough and matted. You have to use your body weight, pressing down with one hand while sawing with the other. Your muscles ache. You manage to cut a small strip, maybe an inch wide and 4 inches long. It's uneven and ragged. You cut another and another. Each piece is a victory against the material's stubborn resistance. You try cutting against the grain, with the grain. It's all difficult. You end up with a small pile of dark, irregular leather strips. Mainstream historical fact time. The consumption of leather or hides in times of extreme famine is a grim reality documented across various historical periods and cultures. While not nutritious in its raw or simply cooked state due to indigestible collagen and tanning agents, desperate people have resorted to boiling or prolonged stewing to try and extract some minimal sustenance, primarily gelatinous compounds. It's a food of last resort, a sign of absolute destitution. You are entering truly bleak culinary territory here. Now the heat. You look at your useless fire-making tools. You look at the damp wood and tinder. You look at the small pot. You need to get this pot hot enough to boil water for a long, long time. A simple spark landing on tinder isn't going to cut it. You need a sustained heat source. This is where it gets really difficult. You decide to try for a small, contained fire. You gather the driest materials you can find, the few brittle twigs under overhanging rocks, some slightly less damp moss, maybe even carefully scraping some dryish fibers from the wreckage itself. You arrange small stones into a makeshift hearth, a tiny U-shape shielded from the wind. This is less about creating a roaring fire for warmth and more about building a minimal heat source directly under the pot. You try the spindle again. Spin, spin, spin. Your hands remember the motion, but they are weak and cold. The friction creates dust, but no ember. Frustration flares, hot and sharp, a stark contrast to the cold reality of your fire failure. You try the flint and steel. A dull spark, nothing catches on the damp tinder. It's maddening. It's like being given the ingredients for cake, but having no oven. You lean back, exhausted, looking at the pile of leather strips, the pot, the useless fire-starting kit. There has to be another way to get heat. Hot rocks? You could heat rocks in a fire if you had one, and then drop them into the pot of water. But how to heat the rocks? The sun is weak, barely offering warmth. Maybe friction heating a larger piece of wood to create an ember, then carefully transferring it? Everything requires a significant heat source to begin with. It's a catch-22 of cold, damp misery. You remember a quirky, disturbing tidbit you once heard about extreme conditions. During the Franklin expedition, lost in the Arctic, desperate crew members reportedly tried to eat pieces of leather equipment. Analysis of remains has shown evidence of gnawing on leather, likely boots or straps. It's a haunting testament to the depths of starvation. Thinking about that makes the taste of salt and grime in your mouth feel even worse. You look at the leather again. It represents effort, potential calories, a last resort, but it requires a process, a potentially impossible process given your current circumstances. This isn't just boiling water for tea. This is a slow, energy-intensive attempt to render something inedible into something that might offer the slightest bit of sustenance. Historians still argue whether the psychological boost of trying to survive, of having a concrete task like finding a pot and attempting to process food, outweighs the physical toll and potential disappointment of failure. Does the act of striving itself provide a form of resilience, or is it merely a draining diversion from the inevitable? As you sit there, cold and hungry, clutching the pot fragment, you're not sure if this desperate plan is giving you hope or just leading you down another path of exhaustion and failure. But the alternative is just waiting, and your body refuses to simply wait. The leather and the pot sit side by side, the grim promise of Section 12's focus fulfilled. Now, can you actually do it? Leaving the beach is surprisingly difficult, not just physically as you clamber over rocks and through tangled wreckage, but emotionally too. The ship, broken as it is the only real connection you have to your old life, to civilization, even to the reason you're here in the first place. Moving away from it feels like severing that last fragile thread, admitting that this is your reality now. But the wind is still biting, and the spray from the haze, even at high tide, would keep everything perpetually damp on the shore. You need higher ground, something more sheltered, and most critically, you need fresh water. That little bit of hardtack was a morale boost, but you can only go a few days without water before things get really truly desperate. Finding fresh water in a survival situation is often prioritized even over food, as dehydration can incapacitate you much faster than starvation. The terrain immediately inland is different from the beach, but not necessarily easier. The fine sand gives way to a mix of larger, smooth stones, rocky outcrops, and dense tussocky grass that grows in thick, uneven clumps. Walking on the tussocks is like trying to cross a field of irregularly spaced, slippery beanbags. You constantly twist your ankles, stumble, and occasionally disappear up to your knee in the gaps between them, which are often filled with mud or hidden rocks. It's exhausting, awkward progress, and your legs are already screaming from the earlier efforts. You pull out that rusty knife you found, hey, instant multi-tool, and use it to occasionally hack at particularly stubborn tangles of vegetation or scrape mud off your boots. Though mostly you just try to step carefully. The wind doesn't seem to lessen much inland, though it shifts direction slightly as you gain a little elevation. It whips around the rocky outcrops and hisses through the grass. The smell of salt water begins to fade, replaced by the damp, earthy scent of peat and wet vegetation. There are no trees here, just low-lying, hardy plants adapted to the cold and wind. It's bleak, stark beauty, like a landscape painting done entirely in shades of gray and brown, with a few touches of muted green. You scan the horizon, such as it is, through the low clouds. No sign of habitation, no smoke, no other people. Just empty, rolling land rising towards mist-shrouded higher ground in the distance. Where would you find water here? In a place like this, far south and exposed, fresh water is likely to come from rain runoff collecting in low points, or perhaps meltwater if there are any permanent snow patches higher up. You can't see any from here. Streams might exist, but they could be hidden in gullies or simply non-existent on this scale. You need to look for signs, greener vegetation, a dip in the land, the sound of trickling water, though the wind makes hearing anything difficult. You stumble toward a slight depression in the land, hoping for a pool. You reach the low point. It's boggy, your boots sinking into the saturated ground, but there's no clear pool, just muddy water soaking the tussocks. You kneel down hesitantly, peering at the waterlogged soil. Could you drink this? It looks stagnant, probably full of peat, and God knows what else. Drinking contaminated water is a quick way to add dysentery to your list of problems, which is a definite thank you next situation in a survival scenario. Your thirst is growing, a dry ache in the back of your throat, but the risk feels too high. You remember hearing something about how on some sub-Antarctic islands, even fresh-looking pools can be contaminated by seabird guano or decaying organic matter. Historically, many explorers and castaways suffered greatly from waterborne diseases before understanding sanitation. You push on, trying to follow a slight downward slope, thinking water might collect at the bottom of a larger valley or gully. The ground remains treacherous. You slip on a wet rock and scrape your hand, a minor injury, but one that stings in the cold air and reminds you how vulnerable you are. Even a small cut could become a major issue out here if it gets infected. You keep scanning, desperately searching for anything that looks like flowing water or a clean pool. The landscape offers little comfort, just endless tussocks, rocks, in the relentless wind. It feels like the island itself is indifferent to your plight, maybe even actively hostile. You spot a patch of ground that looks distinctly different, flatter with perhaps slightly taller, darker green grass. It's in a shallow gully, offering a little more protection from the wind than the open tussock plains. As you get closer, you hear it, a faint, almost imperceptible gurgle, just audible over the wind. Hope flares again, stronger this time. You pick your way carefully down into the gully. The ground is softer here, less rocky. And there it is, a small seep where water is slowly bubbling up from the ground and forming a tiny, clear stream that meanders for a few feet before disappearing back into the boggy ground. It's not a rushing river, not a deep spring, but it's water. And it looks relatively clean, filtering up through the earth. You collapse gratefully beside the seep, the cold ground seeping into your already damp clothes, but you don't care. You cup your hands and bring the icy water to your lips. It's shockingly cold, clean, and tastes faintly of minerals. You drink deeply, cautiously at first, then more greedily as your body remembers its need. It's the best water you've ever tasted, better than any fancy bottled water, any perfectly filtered tap water. This is pure, raw survival fuel. You drink until you can't drink anymore, feeling the hydration slowly begin to soothe your dry mouth and throat. It's a small victory, but a monumental one. You scoop some water into the bottles you salvaged. Thank goodness for finding those, even if they weren't full of rum. Having found water, the next priority is shelter. This gully offers some protection from the wind, but it's still exposed to the sky and the cold ground will leach heat away. You need something more substantial before nightfall. You look around the gully. There are some larger rocks that could potentially form the back or side of a makeshift shelter. The damp canvas you found might be useful for a roof if you can figure out how to support it. You need to find a relatively flat, dryish spot within the gully, close enough to the water seep, but not so close that it's sitting in the bog. You spot a slightly raised area, sheltered by a large, moss-covered rock on one side. It looks promising. The ground here isn't as saturated as the lowest point of the gully. This could work as a temporary spot. You'll need to clear away some of the tussock grass and loose stones to make a relatively flat area to lie down. You can use some of the planks you salvaged, if they're not too heavy to carry back here, to create a raised platform to sleep on, or at least some sort of barrier against the cold earth. Making shelter from salvaged materials or natural elements was a key skill for historical castaways, and often the first priority after finding water. As you start clearing the area, using your hands and the rusty knife, you contemplate the scale of the task ahead. You have water now and a tiny bit of food, and the beginnings of an idea for shelter. But this is just the absolute baseline. You need a reliable food source, proper tools, a way to make fire, and a more permanent, robust shelter to withstand the unpredictable weather of a sub-Antarctic island. The sheer effort required for every single task, even just finding water or clearing a small patch of ground, is immense in this environment. It's a quirky tidbit that some survival experts note that the psychological toll of constant, exhausting physical labor for minimal reward can be as debilitating as the physical privations. You can already feel it, the weariness settling deep into your bones. You look back towards the coast, though you can't see the wreck anymore from down in the gully. You're truly on your own now, reliant only on your wits and whatever resources you can scrounge from this desolate landscape. Historians still argue whether the psychological impact of total isolation and the severance from all familiar anchors or the physical challenges of the environment were the primary cause of failure for historical survival attempts in extreme locations. It feels like a pretty potent combination right now. You need to focus on the physical tasks. Keep moving, keep building, keep trying to make things marginally less awful. The alternative is letting the mental weight crush you, and you're not ready for that yet. Not while you have water and a potential spot for a bed. You start clearing the slightly raised area you found, the one sheltered by the big mossy rock. Your hands are already stiff with cold, and digging through the tussocks and packed soil with just a knife in your fingers is slow, frustrating work. You pull up clumps of thick, intertwined grass, their roots gripping the earth stubbornly. Beneath the grass is a layer of damp, peaty soil and then smaller stones. It's not exactly a construction site, more like a minor archaeological dig into misery. You scrape away at the ground trying to make a space just big enough to lie down, maybe slightly larger. The idea is to get off the coldest, wettest ground, just to elevate yourself enough to potentially make a difference. Every stone you move, every clump of grass you rip out feels like a monumental effort. Your back aches, your knees protest from kneeling on the hard ground, and the wind is a constant, irritating presence, whipping your hair around and chilling you despite the exertion. Okay, so you've got a roughly cleared rectangle, maybe 6 feet by 2, give or take a foot or two, depending on how generous you're feeling. It's still lumpy and uneven, but it's less lumpy and uneven than the surrounding area. Progress, tiny, painful progress. Now you need to incorporate those salvaged materials you dragged up from the beach. Remember that canvas? You unroll it carefully. It's stiff and smells of salt and mildew. You try to figure out the best way to use it. If you could pitch it over the space, supported by something, it might offer some protection from rain, or at least cut the wind. But how do you support it? There are no trees, no straight branches, just rocks and tussocks. You look at the planks you hauled. They're heavy and awkward, too short to span between anything useful, and definitely not straight enough to act as structural supports. Maybe you could lay them on the cleared ground, side by side, create a sort of rudimentary platform. It would elevate you off the damp ground by a few inches, which honestly sounds like the height of luxury right now. You try to arrange the planks, but they're warped in different sizes, leaving gaps. It's not going to be a seamless, comfortable bed, more like sleeping on a series of uneven speed bumps. But hey, uneven speed bumps are better than direct bog contact, right? You lay them down anyway, making the best of it. This is where historical accounts of castaways mention resourcefulness born of desperation, using whatever came ashore, no matter how unsuitable it seemed at first glance. You lean the largest planks against the big mossy rock, creating a sort of back wall inside. The rock itself acts as another wall. This feels like a big step. You have a partial enclosure. Now for the roof. You consider the canvas again. Maybe you can drape it over the planks, leaning against the rock, and somehow anchor the front edge down. You scrabble around, finding some smaller rocks to try and hold the canvas edges in place. It's a flimsy arrangement. The wind immediately catches the canvas, flapping it violently. You need something heavier, or a better way to secure it. More rocks. You find heavier stones, lug them over, and pile them on the edges of the canvas. It helps, but the wind still tries to rip it away. It's not exactly waterproof, and there are gaps everywhere, but it might offer a sliver of shelter. It's the Ritz of tussock and salvage shelters. You can almost hear the concierge. Almost. As the light starts to fade, and it fades early here, the sun barely clearing the horizon even at noon, you huddle in your pathetic little structure. It's cold, bone-chillingly cold. The ground still feels damp beneath the planks, and the wind finds every gap in your canvas roof. You pull your damp, stiff clothes tighter around you. This is where the reality of a sub-Antarctic survival situation really sinks in, colder than any horror movie jump scare. The sheer, grinding, inescapable cold. You need fire, desperately. Not just for warmth, but for morale, for drying clothes, for boiling water. Even though this seep looks clean, boiling is the only guarantee. And maybe, just maybe, for signaling. But making fire here? That's another problem entirely. Everything is damp. The tussock grass is wet. The limited bits of wood from the wreck are probably soaked through. You didn't find anything like tinder among the salvage. You need something dry to catch a spark, something to build a flame, and a way to make that spark in the first place. Do you have anything metallic enough to strike against a rock? That rusty knife? Maybe, but striking sparks from steel and stone is a skill, and you need specific types of stone. Did you grab any loose pieces of the ship's rigging or machinery that might have contained flint? You honestly can't remember. Your focus was on heavier, more obvious stuff like planks and canvas. You try rubbing two pieces of salvaged wood together, like you've seen in survival shows. It's utterly futile. The wood is damp, your hands are cold and clumsy, and you just end up with slightly warmer, still damp wood and aching muscles. You laugh bitterly at yourself. Yeah, just whip out your primitive friction fire skills in sub-zero temperatures with soaking materials. Easy peasy. You briefly consider trying to use a broken piece of glass from the wreck as a lens to focus sunlight, but then you remember the perpetually overcast sky. Plus, finding a shard of glass that would actually work as a lens and holding it steady enough with frozen fingers is optimistic. The need for fire highlights a critical aspect of survival: tools and resources. You have a rusty knife, a few bottles, some damp canvas, and warped planks. It's incredibly basic. Survival in places like this historically relied on sophisticated knowledge, robust equipment, or finding crucial resources like coal deposits, which exist on some sub-Antarctic islands, a quirky tidbit you might recall reading. Without the right tools, even simple tasks become nearly impossible. Imagine trying to build a secure shelter without an axe or saw, or trying to hunt without a spear or gun. It makes you appreciate just how much human civilization relies on tools to amplify our capabilities. As the last light fades, the cold deepens. Your little shelter is barely a barrier. You huddle on your plank bed, wrapped in your damp clothes, feeling the chill seep into your bones. Sleep seems impossible. Your mind races, worrying about the cold, the lack of fire, the gnawing hunger that's starting to become a more insistent presence. Food. Right. The next big hurdle. You ate that small piece of hardtack hours ago. It felt like a feast at the time, but it's long gone. What could you eat here? You haven't seen any animals besides a few seabirds flying overhead. Certainly no large land mammals. Maybe shellfish on the coast? Edible plants. You wouldn't know which ones were safe. The idea of foraging without knowing what you're doing is terrifyingly risky. Historically, scurvy and starvation were rampant among castaways who couldn't find reliable food sources or didn't understand local flora/fauna. Historians still argue whether the immediate physiological effects of cold exposure or the long-term nutritional deficiencies were the greater threat to historical castaways in polar and subpolar regions. Right now, the cold feels pretty immediate and threatening. You shiver uncontrollably. You need to stay awake, try to generate a little body heat by rubbing your hands together or flexing your muscles. But you also desperately need rest. It's a terrible paradox. You close your eyes, trying to block out the sight of your miserable surroundings and the feel of the biting wind, trying to conserve energy, wishing for the impossible. A fire, dry clothes, a warm meal, a rescue ship on the horizon. The cold is a physical weight now, pressing down on you, seeping into your bones, making every breath feel shallow and sharp. Huddled in your makeshift structure, if you can even call this collection of damp canvas and warped wood a structure, you feel utterly exposed. The wind whips around, finding every gap, reminding you just how pathetic your efforts have been against the raw power of this place. Your clothes are still damp, clinging unpleasantly to your skin, and the chill is constant, deep, and unwavering. It's not just uncomfortable, it's draining. Every muscle feels heavy, every joint aches. You try to rub your hands together, generating a little friction, but they feel numb and clumsy. This is the point where the mental game becomes as brutal as the physical one. The initial surge of adrenaline, the drive to do something, anything, starts to dissipate, replaced by a crushing sense of futility. You look around at the barren landscape, the gray sky, your miserable shelter, and the enormity of the challenge feels insurmountable. Hope, that flickering flame you tried to keep alive, begins to dwindle. It's hard to maintain a positive outlook when your reality is this relentlessly bleak. You find your thoughts circling back to the things you miss: a warm bed, a hot meal, the simple feeling of being dry. These aren't helpful thoughts. They just highlight the vast, impossible distance between where you are and where you want to be. Trying to generate body heat, you attempt some exercises in the cramped space, flexing your muscles, tightening your core. It helps for about 30 seconds before the cold reasserts its dominance. You feel the edges of disorientation setting in. The cold makes it hard to think clearly, to plan, even to remember simple things. Did I check that bottle for water again? What was I going to do tomorrow? Your brain feels sluggish, wading through mental fog. This cognitive impairment is one of the insidious dangers of hypothermia. You lose the ability to make sound decisions just when you need it most. The gnawing hunger is a constant companion now. That hardtack feels like a distant memory, a faint whisper on the wind. Your stomach cramps intermittently, a painful reminder of its emptiness. The thought of having to leave your minimal shelter, expose yourself fully to the elements, and search for food feels overwhelming. Where would you even look? The coastal rocks for shellfish? The desolate landscape for unknown, potentially poisonous plants? You don't have the energy, physically or mentally, for a sustained search, especially one with such uncertain prospects. Historically, starvation was a slow, agonizing killer for many castaways who lacked knowledge of local edible resources or the means to acquire them. You try to recall any obscure facts about sub-Antarctic edibles you might have encountered in some forgotten documentary or book. Anything? Moss? Certain roots? The image of your damp moss bread returns, and you shudder. You remember reading something about scurvy grass, a plant found in some cold climates that helped prevent the vitamin C deficiency that plagued sailors? A mainstream historical fact because it changed naval exploration dramatically once its properties were understood. But what does it look like? Is it even on this island? You have no idea. The lack of basic knowledge about this environment is a massive handicap. It's like being dropped onto an alien planet with no guidebook. As the hours drag on in the perpetual twilight, the struggle to stay alert intensifies. Your eyelids feel impossibly heavy. Every instinct screams at you to just stop fighting, to curl up and conserve what little energy you have left. The desire for sleep is almost unbearable, a siren song promising temporary oblivion from the cold and the hunger and the despair. You know logically that sleeping too deeply when you are this cold is dangerous, that you might not wake up, but the exhaustion is a physical pain, a weariness that goes deeper than just needing rest. There's a peculiar quietness that settles in. The initial panic has faded, replaced by a dull resignation. The wind still blows, but its sound seems muffled, distant. You listen to the faint flapping of the canvas, the occasional drip of water, the sound of your own ragged breathing. This is it. This is the reality of boring survival when things go wrong. Not a dramatic fight to the death against a polar bear. Not that there are any here, thank goodness. But a slow, quiet fading. It's the cumulative effect of cold, hunger, and exposure grinding you down, minute by minute, hour by hour. You think about the human body's surprising resilience, a mainstream historical fact demonstrated by countless survival stories throughout history, yet also its ultimate fragility. There's a quirky or fringe tidbit you heard once about people hallucinating warmth just before severe hypothermia sets in, a strange, cruel trick of the brain. You half-jokingly wonder if you'll start seeing warm beaches and steaming mugs of tea soon, but mostly you just feel the pervasive cold, the ache in your joints, the emptiness in your gut. Historians still argue whether psychological fortitude or sheer physical endurance played a larger role in the survival or demise of historical castaways facing extreme conditions. Right now, you feel like both are failing. The will to keep going is weakening, and the body feels on the verge of collapse. You consider trying again to find something, anything, but the effort required seems monumental. Even sitting up feels like too much work. You pull the damp canvas tighter around your shoulders, wishing it was a thick wool blanket. The planks beneath you offer minimal insulation. You shift trying to find a less uncomfortable position, but there's no escaping the cold contact. Your thoughts drift, becoming less coherent. Images from home, faces of loved ones, mixed with the harsh reality of your surroundings. It's a confused, weary mental landscape. You close your eyes, not with the intent to sleep, but just to block out the sight of your miserable reality. The darkness behind your eyelids is a small mercy. You try to focus on something else, anything else, but the cold and the hunger are insistent, pulling you back to the present misery. This quiet desperation, this slow giving up of the fight, is perhaps the most common end to survival situations like this. Less dramatic than stories of heroism, but far more frequent. You breathe in slowly, feeling the icy air bite at your lungs, and exhale, the breath misting faintly in the gloom of your shelter. There's nothing left to do but wait in hope, or perhaps simply cease to hope. The exhaustion is a heavy blanket, pulling you down. The struggle feels too hard, the reward too distant, maybe even impossible. You let your muscles relax just a little, and the cold immediately bites harder. But the weariness is profound. The light outside your flimsy shelter has long since vanished, replaced by a darkness that feels deeper, heavier than just the absence of sun. The wind has perhaps softened its relentless howl slightly, or maybe you're just too tired to notice it as much. Your body feels incredibly heavy, your limbs leaden. The cold is still here, a constant pressure, but the sharp, biting edge seems to have dulled, replaced by a deep, pervasive numbness. There's a quiet stillness within you now, a surrender that isn't about giving up hope entirely, but simply about acknowledging that the fight for this moment is too much. You can let go, just for a little while. Let the exhaustion claim you, pull you down into a state of rest, a temporary escape from the biting reality. Picture yourself not on a cold, windswept island, but somewhere soft and quiet. Feel the tension slowly drain from your muscles, starting from your toes and working its way up, releasing the tightness in your calves, your thighs, your shoulders, your jaw. Let it all go. The worries, the pushim, the hunger, they can wait. For now, there is only the gentle rise and fall of your own breath, rough and steady in the quiet dark. The imagery of the island, the cold, the struggle, let it all begin to fade like mist dissolving in the morning sun. It's less important now. What matters is the quiet stillness, the slow descent into calm. You are safe here in this moment, letting go, drifting into sleep.